Hey there, and welcome to a deep dive on marketing and sustainability. We're going to be cracking open new W Can Marketing Save the Planet? We want to see if it lives up to its title, right?
Yeah.
You're interested in this whole kind of how those two worlds collide, so we're on a mission to uncover the actionable insights and maybe even some aha moments for you.
And I think what you'll find in this book is that it's a refreshingly pragmatic approach.
Yeah.
It's not just about preaching about the problems. It rolls up its sleeves and digs into solutions. It even gives you 101 concrete ways that marketers can make a difference.
Okay, see, I like that, 101, like that's specific.
Yeah.
But before we get to the solutions, let's talk about the problem. So the book starts by addressing this big tension between profit and the planet. And it's almost like this underlying assumption that to make money, you have to exploit the planet, right?
Yeah, it's a common misconception, and the book really tackles this head on, this idea that, the current economic model with its focus on endless growth is just not viable on a planet with finite resources.
Yeah.
It's like, trying to stuff an ever-expanding elephant into a phone booth. Something's got to give.
It's funny you should put it that way because the book actually quotes Sir David Attenborough. And he said, quoting economist Kenneth Boulding, that anyone who thinks you can have infinite growth on a planet with finite resources is either a madman or an economist.
Right.
And that really struck me as this stark warning, almost a call to action.
It is a call to action, and the book doesn't shy away from the urgency of the situation either. It highlights, the very real, very serious consequences of our current path by pointing to these very urgent warnings from the IPCC about the climate emergency. This isn't some distant threat. It's happening now.
This is our reality. So
Yeah.
what can we do? So the book spends a good chunk of time unpacking the Paris Agreement, but not just in this fluffy, sign this and save the world kind of way. It
Yeah.
actually gets into...
It gets into the weeds.
Yeah.
It goes beyond those feel-good headlines to really emphasize the tangible steps that businesses need to take to meet these goals. For example, it breaks down these things called carbon budgets. So basically how much carbon we can emit before hitting those irreversible tipping points, and then what it actually means to reach net zero emissions.
Which, I always thought net zero by 2050. I was like, oh, we've got time.
Right.
But the book's like, no, we need to hit peak emissions by 2025. And to get there, we need a roadmap.
And you know what? The Paris Agreement actually has one, and it's called the Paris Rule Book.
Yeah.
It lays out all the operational details for actually achieving the agreement's goals. And it basically puts the onus on businesses to step up and make it happen.
Which brings us to marketing, right? It's not enough for companies to just quietly do the work. They need to be able to communicate their efforts honestly and engage their customers in the process.
And this is where things get tricky. Because as the book, astutely points out, we're living in the age of greenwashing. You've probably seen it, right?
Mm-hmm.
These vague claims eco-friendly, plastered on products without any real substance behind them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, every company wants to be seen as the green option, but how can you tell who's being genuine? Who's actually walking the walk and who's just jumping on the bandwagon for the trend?
Right. Well, the book provides a sort of skeptic's guide to greenwashing, which I found incredibly useful. It kind of arms you with the knowledge to see through those empty buzzwords and actually dig deeper for evidence of real action. It even cites a shocking statistic from the UK Competition and Markets Authority. They did a study and found that 42% of green claims were potentially exaggerated or misleading.
42%, that's almost half
I know.
of everything we see. So how do we as just people who are bombarded with this, how do we separate the real deal from the hype?
Well, the book really emphasizes the importance of transparency in action.
Mm-hmm.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. Take Tony's Chocolonely, for example.
Okay, yeah.
They're not just making delicious chocolate, but they're actively fighting child labor in the cocoa industry. And the best part? They're completely open about their journey. They even publish an annual fair report detailing their progress, their challenges, and yes, even their shortcomings.
I was going to say, because no one's perfect.
Nobody's perfect.
And to pretend that you are is kind of...
suspicious.
Yeah, so that level of honesty, I feel is refreshing.
It is.
Especially in an industry that is kind of notorious for ethical issues.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, the book doesn't just highlight the success stories. It also calls out those companies that maybe aren't as ethical as they seem.
Exactly. And sometimes these are the companies with the shiniest, most planet-friendly images.
Yeah.
The book uses BrewDog as a kind of cautionary tale, the craft beer company.
Right, yeah.
They were publicly called out for having like a toxic work environment, despite all of their very eco-conscious branding. So it's a stark reminder that true sustainability begins from within, with something they call internal engagement.
Internal engagement. So it's more than just like having a couple recycling bins in the office and calling it a day.
Way more. The book really digs into how vital it is to have your employees on board with your sustainability mission.
Right.
And this isn't just like some feel-good HR initiative, like it actually. It cites all these studies showing that employees, particularly younger generations, want to work for companies that share their values. In fact, over half of those surveyed said they wouldn't even consider working for a company that wasn't actively committed to social and environmental responsibility.
Over half, that's huge. So attracting and retaining talent aside, what's the business case for this internal engagement? Like, why does it matter for the bottom line?
Well, think about it. Disengaged employees lead to lower productivity, higher turnover, and ultimately a hit to your bottom line. The book actually mentions that disengaged employees cost U.S. businesses billions of dollars annually.
Wow.
So creating a sustainable, ethical workplace, it just makes good business sense.
Yeah, it's like this whole ripple effect, right? Like happier employees, stronger company culture, and just like more sustainable business overall. But let's talk about the products themselves for a second. Like, is it enough to just offer a greener version of what we're already buying?
That's a great question, and one that the book tackles head on. It argues that simply swapping out conventional products for greener alternatives without really addressing our overall consumption patterns is just substitution.
Oh, so we're not really solving the problem. We're just kind of like shifting it around a little bit.
Exactly, like we're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. We need a more fundamental shift in how we consume. The book introduces this really interesting concept called choice editing.
Choice editing.
It's about how companies can strategically present sustainable options to their customers.
Okay, so instead of just being like bombarded with all these choices, it's like you're being guided towards the more sustainable option.
Exactly.
Okay.
They give this really interesting example of a study where green electricity was set as the default option for consumers. And you know what happened? A whopping 94% of people stuck with it.
Wow. See, that's kind of what I'm talking about with the aha moments. I love that. That's so interesting.
Yeah, and it really highlights, it totally works.
Yeah.
Like you can...
Like how some coffee shops will incentivize you to bring your own cup by like knocking off a percentage or,
Totally.
giving you like a discount or whatever. And it's like, you still have the option to be lazy, let's be honest.
Right.
And just like get the to-go cup, but like just that little nudge is sometimes all it takes.
Totally. And I think that's a key takeaway for marketers is making sustainable options both desirable and accessible.
And I imagine affordability is a big part of that accessibility, right? Because sustainable options, let's be honest, they can be more expensive.
You're absolutely right. And the book actually cites research from IBM. They found that consumers really do want sustainable products, but they want them to also be high quality, convenient, and crucially, they don't want to break the bank.
So no more green premium, where like, being eco-conscious means you also have to like empty your wallet.
Ideally not.
Yeah.
The book really argues that sustainability should be for everyone.
Right.
Not just those who can afford to pay a premium. And that means, finding creative ways to make responsible consumption both appealing and financially accessible.
Which makes sense because, as the book highlights, more and more consumers are factoring sustainability into their purchasing decisions, which is great.
Yeah.
But with this increased awareness comes a new level of scrutiny, right? Like consumers, especially those younger generations, they're getting more discerning about these things, right?
Absolutely. Transparency is key.
Yeah.
And this goes beyond just slapping a label on a product and calling it a day. Consumers, particularly those younger generations, they're savvy, they can see through that. They want to know the whole story from how materials are sourced to like the social and environmental impact of production.
And they can sniff out the BS a mile away.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, 100%.
It's not just about what you say, it's how you say it at this point too.
You're spot on. And the book really encourages marketers to find new ways to talk about sustainability. So instead of relying on guilt trips or apocalyptic scenarios, they suggest framing it around, things like shared values, positive impact, and even personal well-being.
Because honestly, that doom and gloom narrative can be like very overwhelming.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting, yeah. And it can actually lead to this feeling of eco-anxiety, which the book talks about, the like feeling of being overwhelmed and helpless in the face of climate change. I'll be honest, it's something I've struggled with. You're definitely not alone.
Yeah.
Eco-anxiety is a growing concern, especially among younger generations. And I think this is where marketers can play a really crucial role, not by adding to that anxiety, but by offering a sense of hope and agency.
So instead of the world is ending, buy our product, it's more like together we can make a difference, and here's how.
Exactly. It's about highlighting those solutions, showcasing the progress that's being made, and empowering consumers to actually be part of the solution. And this kind of shift requires us to rethink some fundamental assumptions about marketing's role. In fact, the book even challenges this like long-held belief that growth should be the ultimate goal.
Wait, did I hear that right? Marketing questioning growth? That's almost sacrilegious.
I know, right? It sounds radical. But the book really explores this fascinating concept called demarketing.
Demarketing. Okay, I'm going to need you to like break that one down for me.
Okay, so demarketing. It's basically the opposite of traditional marketing. So instead of trying to sell more stuff, it's about promoting things like well-being, connection, community, experiences over material goods.
So instead of like pushing the latest gadget or whatever, it's more about helping people find satisfaction and connection in like more sustainable ways.
Exactly.
That almost sounds like, I don't know, like a wellness retreat. It doesn't sound like a marketing strategy.
Right. It sounds very radical.
Yeah.
But the book actually makes a very compelling case for why this approach isn't just good for the planet, it's good for business too.
Okay.
It suggests that maybe, just maybe, the most successful brands of the future will be those that prioritize well-being and responsible consumption over relentless acquisition.
That's a pretty big shift in mindset,
It is.
both for marketers and consumers. But, you know, I don't know, maybe it's time for like a radical rethink, right?
Yeah.
With the state of the planet, with, you know, the very real threat of climate change.
Yeah, I think so too. And luckily, this book really gives us the tools and the inspiration to start making that shift.
You know, it's funny, we often talk about sustainability in terms of what we can give up, right? Like driving less, buying less, consuming less. But this whole demarketing thing, it almost like flips that on its head, you know?
Totally.
It's about finding fulfillment and connection in new ways, which I gotta say is kind of refreshing as a perspective.
It is, and it speaks to this like growing desire for purpose and authenticity,
Right.
especially like amongst those younger generations. They're not just buying products anymore, they're buying into a brand's values
Right.
and their vision for like a better world.
And that's where those 101 actionable ways the book talks about come in, right? It's not just theory, it's about like giving marketers the tools to actually put these ideas into practice.
Absolutely, yeah. It covers a wide range of strategies from like revamping traditional marketing KPIs
Okay.
to like leveraging the power of storytelling and even like influencer marketing.
Okay, let's dive into some of those. You mentioned KPIs earlier, and I'm curious about that. Like, how do you measure the success of a demarketing campaign, for example? Because if the goal isn't just to sell more stuff,
Right.
then we need new ways to measure success, right?
Right. And the book suggests looking beyond those kind of traditional metrics like sales and profit.
Right.
And actually like incorporating things like well-being, happiness, you know, positive social impact.
It's like what we were talking about earlier, like happier employees, more engaged community, a healthier planet. Like those things have value,
Totally.
even if it's not like immediately reflected on a balance sheet.
Exactly. And while measuring something like happiness, it might seem a little tricky.
Right.
The book actually offers some like pretty interesting ideas.
Right.
For example, instead of just tracking like website clicks or social media likes,
Right.
maybe measure customer loyalty, right? Employee satisfaction, even like community engagement.
Oh, interesting.
Are your customers sticking around longer? Are your employees more passionate about the work that they're doing?
Right.
Are you making a tangible difference in your community? These are all kind of indicators of success in a demarketing model.
So it's about like shifting from those short-term gains to like long-term value creation.
Exactly.
For both people and the planet. Which brings us back to those 101 ways to make a difference. Like, where do you even begin to tackle such a, like, you know, a big challenge like that?
Well, the book emphasizes that it's important to kind of start from within, right?
Okay.
That internal engagement piece that we talked about. It's about creating a workplace culture that truly embodies your sustainability values and empowers employees
Sure.
to be part of the solution.
It's like that old saying, be the change you want to see in the world. Like, it starts with walking the walk internally, right?
Yeah.
Before you can even, like, authentically talk the talk externally.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many creative ways to do this. Like the book talks about creating these like internal sustainability hubs where employees can share ideas and resources, offering like carbon literacy training so everyone kind of understands their impact, and even like incentivizing employees to come up with innovative solutions.
That's so cool. Like, it's turning sustainability into, like, a collective effort.
Yeah,
It's not just, like, something that's dictated from the top down.
exactly. And I think, when employees feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves, that passion and commitment, it's going to shine through in everything that they do.
Right.
From like the products that they create to even just like the customer service that they provide.
Right. And that brings us to another really powerful tool, I think, in the marketer's arsenal of content. But not just any content, content that, like, tells a different story.
Yes. Content that educates, inspires, and empowers. We're bombarded with so much marketing noise these days.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
It's so easy to just tune it out.
Yeah.
But I think when you create content that genuinely resonates with people's values and aspirations, it's going to cut through that clutter.
So instead of those, like, vague greenwashed claims, it's about showcasing, like, the real impact of your efforts.
Yes.
Like, here's how we're reducing our carbon footprint, or, here are the people whose lives are being positively impacted by, like, you buying this thing.
You got it.
Yeah.
The book even talks about the power of storytelling.
Oh, yeah.
Like, imagine sharing a story about a customer who completely transformed their life by embracing a more sustainable lifestyle.
That's a good story.
Right.
Yeah.
Or like highlighting the journey of an employee who spearheaded this like groundbreaking environmental initiative within your own company.
Oh, that's a good one, too. I love that.
Right.
Because stories, they stick with us.
They do.
They make us, like, feel something. And I feel like when you can connect with a consumer on that emotional level, they're more likely to, like, actually do something about it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The book actually uses Tony's Chocolonely as an example again.
Oh, yeah.
Remember how we were talking about their annual fair report? Well, they don't just present like dry data and statistics.
Right.
They actually weave this really compelling narrative about their mission to make 100% slave-free chocolate, highlighting the challenges, the triumphs, the people behind it all.
So it's about making it personal, relatable.
Yes.
And speaking of, like, connecting with people, we can't forget about social media because, like, in today's world, social media is, like, the new town square.
It is.
It's where we all go to, like, connect and share ideas, and I feel like increasingly, like, learn about a company's values.
Totally. And because it's such a public forum, the book talks about how like transparency and authenticity is so important on social media.
Yes.
It's not enough to just like broadcast your sustainability message.
Right.
You need to be ready to actually engage in conversations, respond to concerns, and most importantly, I think, build trust.
Because social media, it can be like, it can be a double-edged sword, right? Because it also gives consumers, especially those like, digitally native younger generations, it gives them a platform to call out the BS.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like to call out greenwashing.
Totally.
And hold these brands accountable.
Yeah. They can sniff out inauthenticity a mile away.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not just about like what you say, but how you say it and who you choose to amplify your message. And the book actually talks about the growing importance of influencer marketing in this space.
Oh, interesting. Influencers, you mean like people with huge followings on like Instagram and TikTok?
Yeah, but it's not just about finding someone with a lot of followers, it's about finding the right influencers.
Okay.
The ones who genuinely align with your brand's values and who have already built that trust and credibility with their audience.
So it has to be like an authentic partnership then.
Yes.
Not just like a paid promotion.
Exactly. And the book even like warns against greenwashing in influencer marketing.
Oh, interesting.
It's not enough to just like pay someone to post about your eco-friendly product or whatever.
Yeah.
It's about finding influencers who are already passionate about sustainability and working with them to create content that actually like, educates, inspires, encourages action.
Because, I mean, when it's done right, influencer marketing, it can be so powerful.
Well, it could be huge.
Right. They have like a direct line to their audience's hearts and minds at that point.
They do, and they can use their platform to like normalize sustainable living, showcase those kind of, accessible solutions, and just make caring about the planet cool.
Right. Like, it's cool to care. And it makes me think about something else that the book talks about, like the importance of like understanding your audience.
Yes.
And tailoring your message accordingly.
Totally. You need to know who you're talking to and what matters to them. For example, if you're trying to target, like eco-conscious millennials,
Right.
they might be more interested in like your company's efforts to reduce its carbon footprint or, like support ethical sourcing.
Whereas like Gen Z might be more focused on like the social justice issues.
Exactly.
And like, how your brand is promoting like diversity, equity, inclusion.
Exactly. It's about understanding the nuances of each generation's values and tailoring your message accordingly. And speaking of tailoring your message, the book also really digs into like the language that we use when we talk about sustainability.
Because words matter.
They do.
Right. And like using the right language can make all the difference in whether your message like actually lands with people or not.
Right. And the book really encourages marketers to move away from that fear-based messaging.
Like those like really sad ads where it's like the polar bears clinging to the shrinking ice caps.
Exactly. And while those images are really powerful and important for like raising awareness, they can also be paralyzing.
Yep.
And I think the book makes the argument that we need to kind of balance those messages with ones of hope, empowerment, and most importantly, action.
So instead of just highlighting the problem, it's also about focusing on the solutions.
Yes.
And like, inspiring people that like they can be a part of that solution.
Exactly. It's about showing people that their actions, no matter how small they are, can make a difference. And I think it's about making sustainable living feel accessible, achievable, and even, dare I say, desirable.
Right. Because if it feels good, people are more likely to do it.
Totally.
It's like rewarding yourself for making a sustainable choice.
Right, yeah.
Whether it's like, treating yourself to like a nice locally sourced meal or just like feeling a sense of pride because you're like supporting a company that like aligns with your values.
You've got it. And when we can create those positive associations with sustainable living, it becomes less about sacrifice.
Right.
And more about making choices that just like align with our values.
Right, and enhance our well-being, which actually kind of brings us to another really important piece of the puzzle, the supply chain.
Yes.
Right, because we've talked a lot about a company's like internal operations and like its messaging, but what about like the environmental and social impact of its like actual products?
Yeah, that's a crucial piece of the puzzle and honestly one that's often overlooked.
Right.
The book really emphasizes the importance of transparency and traceability throughout the entire supply chain.
So like knowing where your materials are coming from, how they're being produced, like what are the working conditions like for the people who are like, involved in making this stuff?
Exactly. And this is where things get really complex because these global supply chains can be incredibly opaque.
Right.
But I think the book makes a really important point that it's not enough to just trust that your suppliers are doing the right thing.
Right.
You need to actively engage with them, set clear standards, and hold them accountable.
And, the book actually called out like a specific type of emission that I feel like a lot of people don't even realize is a thing.
Totally.
Something about Scope 3 emissions.
Yes. Scope 3 emissions. It
Oh.
sounds very technical, but it basically refers to all the indirect emissions that come from a company's like value chain. So think about things like transportation, waste disposal, business travel, even like the energy that your customers use to consume your products.
Oh, wow. Okay, so even if a company has like their own house in order, like it's those Scope 3 emissions that could be like totally canceling out all their good work.
Exactly. And the book, points out that these Scope 3 emissions often account for like the lion's share of a company's overall carbon footprint, which is why addressing them is absolutely crucial for actually reaching those like ambitious net zero targets.
That is a huge undertaking. That requires like working with like your entire supply chain.
It does.
Your suppliers, your distributors, like even your customers, to find solutions.
It does.
Mhm.
But the book also kind of highlights how this can be a really incredible opportunity to drive innovation
Okay.
and create a more resilient and equitable supply chain for everyone involved.
Right. And that brings us back to this idea of collaboration, right? Like it's not just about competition anymore. It's about like companies actually working together to tackle these like big systemic challenges.
Exactly. And the book gives some really inspiring examples of companies that are already doing this, like Patagonia, for example.
Okay, yeah.
They've been kind of leading the charge on sustainable apparel for years now, and they're incredibly open about sharing their knowledge and best practices with other companies, even their competitors.
It's like they're saying, hey, this sustainability thing, it's bigger than all of us.
Exactly.
Let's figure it out together.
Yes. And that kind of collaborative spirit, I think, is essential if we're going to create a truly sustainable future.
Now, before we move on, I wanted to circle back to something we touched on earlier, like that eco-anxiety. You mentioned it's like a growing concern, especially among like younger generations, So like how can marketers kind of like address that in a way that's both like sensitive and effective?
That's a great question. And the book offers some really like insightful guidance on this. So first and foremost, it emphasizes the importance of being mindful of the language that we use. It's about finding that balance between like raising awareness about the urgency of the situation,
Right.
but not like, overwhelming people with doom and gloom.
So less the world is ending and more like, here are some concrete steps we can take together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about framing sustainability in a way that's hopeful, empowering, and action-oriented.
Right, because I feel like if you just leave people with like, we're all gonna die, they're gonna be like, well,
Right, what's the point?
what's the point? Exactly. Like, what do I do with that information?
Right, and the book also talks about the importance of showcasing progress.
Yep.
Like reminding people that while we still have a long way to go, positive change is happening.
Right. It's not like hopeless. It's just, it's a lot, but we can do it.
Exactly, and I think like celebrating those wins, no matter how small, is crucial for kind of like combating that feeling of helplessness that can often accompany that eco-anxiety.
And it doesn't all have to be like serious either.
Right.
Like, I feel like a little humor can go a long way in making sustainability feel less like daunting
Right.
and more approachable.
Totally. The book actually encourages marketers to like embrace humor and creativity in their messaging.
Okay.
Like who said saving the planet can't be fun?
Right. If you want people to like get on board with something, you got to make it like enjoyable.
Exactly.
Not like, you're bad, now do this.
Right, exactly. And that kind of brings us back to this whole idea of demarketing. It's not about telling people they can't have nice things.
Right.
It's about helping them find joy and fulfillment in new, more sustainable ways.
Right. It's about like redefining what it even means to like live a good life at this point.
Totally.
One that's good for like, everyone and the planet.
Precisely. And that's a message I think we can all get behind.
As we've been talking about all these different strategies and ideas, it's really struck me that marketing has this incredible power
Right.
to shape our perceptions, our desires, even our values. And if we've been using it to like, fuel this engine of consumerism,
Right.
maybe we can also use it to kind of steer us towards a more sustainable future.
Totally. I think that's like the key takeaway from this book.
Yeah.
It's not about demonizing marketing
Right.
or like throwing the entire industry under the bus.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the immense power and influence it holds and challenging marketers to wield that power responsibly.
It's like this like superhero origin story.
Right.
But instead of a cape and superpowers, it's like, marketers with their creativity and their understanding of human behavior.
Cool.
And like their mission is saving the planet.
Yes, I love that analogy. And the book really does like empower marketers to see themselves as like these agents of change. Like it actually gives them a framework for making a real difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just selling more stuff.
And it all comes back to that fundamental question that the book poses, right? Like,
Yeah.
if marketing helped create the consumerist culture that we live in, can it also help us, like, unmake it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think, the book doesn't pretend to have all the answers,
Right.
but it offers this really compelling vision for what a more sustainable future could look like a future where brands prioritize people and planet alongside profit.
A future where instead of like, constantly chasing the next shiny object, where like, we find satisfaction in experiences,
Right.
in connections, in like, knowing that our choices are actually making a positive impact.
Yeah, and that's a future I can definitely get behind.
Me too. So as we wrap up our deep dive into can marketing save the planet, what's your biggest takeaway? Like for our listener, what's the one thing you hope they'll remember like long after they finish listening?
For me, it's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more sustainable future,
Right.
right? And that includes marketers.
Yeah.
Your skills, your creativity, your understanding of human behavior,
Yes.
those are all incredibly valuable assets in the fight against climate change. So don't underestimate your power to make a difference.
I love that. That's so important because it's easy to feel like, especially as just like one person, you know?
Totally
It's like,
agree.
oh, what can I do? But it's like, no, when you start to see yourself as part of this, like, collective movement,
Right.
then it's like, oh, wow, these small changes, they actually do add up.
They totally do. They have this ripple effect. And I think that's what this book is all about. It's about inspiring marketers to kind of like step into their power,
Yeah.
to embrace their role as like change makers,
Love it.
and to use their skills to create a more sustainable and equitable future for everyone.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought-provoking question from the book, which is, what if the most successful brands of the future are those that prioritize well-being and responsible consumption over relentless acquisition?
Ooh,
It's a good one, right?
it's a good one. It really challenges us to like rethink our definition of success, right?
Yes.
Both as marketers, but also just as consumers.
Yeah, it asks us to really consider what we value
Yeah,
and to align our choices with those values.
because ultimately the most sustainable choices
Mm.
are the ones that are good for people, good for the planet, and yes, even good for business.
And that's it for our deep dive.
And that's a wrap.
We hope you found it insightful, inspiring, and maybe even a little bit challenging.
A little bit.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep making those conscious choices.
See you next time.
It's your body.